Welcome to the STARS webinar. My name is David Orn. I'm Director of Programs and Communication at STARS. This is our second webinar, and for the second time, we are fully booked out with 100 participants joining in from across the globe. So wherever you are, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Today, we talk with Joerg WUTTKE about what US-China decoupling means for the EU. Joerg is Chief Representative of BASF China and President of the European Union Chamber of Commerce in China. He's based in Beijing. Joerg also serves as Chairman of the China Task Force of the Business and Industry Advisory Committee to the OECD. Since joining BASF in 1997, Joerg has been responsible for helping guide the company's investment strategies in China, negotiation of large projects, and government relations. Before joining BASF, Joerg worked with ABB for 11 years. Last but certainly not least, Joerg is also a member of the STARS International Board. Good afternoon to you, Joerg, and thank you for speaking in this webinar.
Thanks for the opportunity.
We now have 30 minutes to discuss with Joerg. I will take the privilege of asking the first couple questions to get the discussion going. In the meantime, if you have any questions for Joerg, please use the Q&A feature below to type in your question, and we'll try to get as many answers as possible. The main question Joerg is helping us to answer today is what US-China decoupling means for the EU. As decoupling has now become kind of a buzzword already, with different people using it in very different ways, can you please start by first telling us your definition of what decoupling means in the context of US-China relations?
Well, decoupling is indeed very difficult to define. It just possibly is the absolute opposite of globalization. Decoupling can look in many shades. Can look in the financial sector, can be in manufacturing, can be standards, can mean a lot of things, internet connection and so forth. The European Chamber actually will launch a report. I hope in December we start with a survey in later part of the summer in order to get a grip on this one, what it means for companies. The decoupling discussion, of course, now is between US and China. We are, of course, worried in Europe that it will spill over and that the kind of attempts of distinguishing between the European system and the Chinese system in many areas will disappear. So in a way, we don't want this. It means complexity increase, it means cost increase. Decoupling is really a big worry in a time when the world is hit by Corona and is facing an economic recession. So anyhow, so stay tuned until December.
In last week's webinar with former White House Deputy Chief of Staff, Mona Satwan, who is a colleague of yours on the STARS International Board, Mona said, and I quote, "There is nobody left in America who is pro-China." You have lived in Beijing for over 30 years, I believe, and you are very familiar, or as familiar as one can be, with the mood among policymakers in Beijing. So I have to ask you, is there anybody left in China who is pro-America?
Well, I haven't done a survey from obviously, but the cut goes very, very deep, and I think the rift, as Mona rightfully pointed out, actually started already in the second administration of Obama, where notably the US was drifting away from China, and that was reciprocated by the Chinese leadership. So in a way, I'm sure there are many people who still love the United States. It after all stands for soft power, it stands for Hollywood, and it stands for Wall Street. But of course, the disappointment here is very deep. Of course, now you look at the looking glass is labeled competition and rivalry. With this silly season coming up now, I guess that this is not going to get better. So yes, there are individuals. The US has definitely allure, but boy, I've never seen it that bad.
Taking the picture you just painted as the backdrop, and let's move on to the EU. So does that mean that the EU eventually has to choose a side in this confrontation between the US and China? And what role or opportunity maybe do you see for von der Leyen's geopolitical commission?
That is possibly the most asked question I get, and the most difficult to answer, because after all, Europe, if you include still the UK, Europe is the largest economy in the world. We stand for 40% of technology. We are the biggest market of China. So in a way, in itself, we are a superpower, minus, of course, the military and the global implications on the security side. So in a way, I always feel like we don't have to choose. The others have to choose how to deal with us. Does China want to have more trade frictions with us? Do they want an investment agreement? So in a way, it's up to them to choose. Unfortunately, the US has chosen a more volatile approach towards Europe. You know, this fight about German cars, then these tariffs on Scottish whiskey and so forth. No, Europe doesn't have to choose. I guess that we should basically look at ourselves and see how we can best make the best out of it.
In such a volatile environment, as you just mentioned, companies certainly want to minimize their risks. But are they really reducing their activities in China? Do you have any evidence from the EU chamber maybe that production is moving to other countries or back to the EU?
Well, we have a survey coming up next Wednesday, June 10th, and I can sort of leak that only 10% said that they are considering not moving, they're considering to move out of China. A figure which is pretty much replicated by AmCham members. So for us, having the next 10 years ahead of us here, China stands for 30% of global growth on GDP side. 30%, 30. So, I mean, that is the accumulated growth potential of all OECD countries together. I mean, in chemicals, my backyard, 60%, 60% of global growth in chemistry is going to be in China. I mean, you would be insane to move out of China unless you have a very good strategic or security reason for it. And that's where it gets interesting, because the corona crisis has taught Europe a lesson about the reliability of pharmaceutical supplies, as well as some supplies that Japan noticed in rare earth and so forth. So I guess we just, and actually at least my country, Germany, started that process to look into what do we really, really need in order to make sure that our populations are safe on the health side as well as on the security side. And the rest of it, leave it to the Americans. And I can tell you, it's very, very small. So no real decoupling in the sense of we are leaving China. There is certainly some companies looking into additional places. No one can match the Chinese clusters in efficiency and size. And again, as you are very familiar, David, with Guangdong itself, just one province has the GDP of Russia, and Shenzhen has the GDP of South Africa. So think again if you want to diversify and move out.
So beyond this very drastic step of moving out, can you give us, just to be a bit more specific, like a laundry list of the biggest concerns among EU companies then with regards to decoupling? What are the main challenges?
Well, the main challenge is, of course, actually the decouplings, I would say, in many ways was started from China. China has decoupled from the internet, for example. I mean, I can't get any decent newspaper unless I have a VPN. Already the kind of speed with the internet is very, very poor. China has incredible fast intranet. But the connection with the outside world there is not good. The same with engagement, the political engagement, the kind of security you feel when sitting down with your Chinese counterpart and talk about all kinds of things, you're far more cautious. These days, that's an intellectual decoupling, I would say. And then, of course, standards. China, with Belt and Road Initiative, wants to project its own system of procurement in the global economy. The Chamber brought out a paper in January about this. And then decoupling in the sense of the US, forcing people in order to look into the equipment. Is there more value, 20% so far, of value in any equipment that you possibly as European might buy and install in China? If that's the case, you have to go through a process in the US to get a permission for it. So the toolbox of nasty things can be very extended. And of course, we want to stop this. We really fear that we will have to make choices also on technology. If we can't get it into China, we definitely might have a challenge of having to invest it in a second-based place.
You already hinted at it. One of the most important items on the EU-China agenda is the investment agreement. Can you give us an update on that? Can you see any progress being made in this area?
Yeah, I mean, this morning, the German and the Chinese government, after yesterday's Merkel-Xi Jinping phone call, informed the public that the summit in Leipzig is postponed. That was a very important milestone. Merkel wanted to have 27 heads of government from the European side, plus the Commission meeting Xi Jinping. And of course, I mean, the glowing star would have been the signing of this investment agreement. Now, this is off. In a way, we always said, I met Emmanuel Macron in Shanghai last November, and when he said, so how important is it? I said to him, you know, in substance, it is very important, not in speed. So don't get into this kind of last minute negotiation where we compromise a lot. The investment agreement has to be very good quality for us. The Chinese side claims, why not meeting 50-50, which is, I think, totally impossible because, you know, we are a very open economy, whereas China still is rather closed up. And if you meet in the middle, then, you know, what does it mean? Do we have to close up more in Europe and China opens up more? No, we want both to remain open or to become more open. And there, I think the negotiations are very difficult, 7 years by now. Nearly 30 rounds of negotiations, and I guess the stumbling block is the role of state-owned enterprises.
We have a question from Felix Kottmann, who is a researcher at the Singapore ETH Center. He writes that Hainan has just been announced to become a free trade hub. What is your opinion on that? What is the significance?
Well, it's pretty much very significant because it is coming out of the Politburo. Xi Jinping put his name to it. He assigned a senior Politburo member, Han Zhang, to follow through. And let's see, I mean, Hainan in itself is greatly located, but doesn't have the kind of economic significance that Guangdong has or Shanghai, Zhejiang has. But still, it's interesting. But you know, after so many years of good speeches in your own country, Xi Jinping gave a great speech in Davos, as well as follow-up in Boao. Actually, we are really waiting for the implementation of all these promises. In the chamber, we have a word for it. We call it fatigue, promise fatigue. So in a way, yes, we listen, we will engage with the government, we will try to probe it, we will make our members aware of the possibilities, but again, words are nice, we need actions.
I just got a follow-up question on the EU-China summit, so if you don't mind circling back. The question is coming from Hakan Hedström, who is the head of Asian market strategy, and he is asking, the EU-China summit in Leipzig has been postponed due to Corona. When will this initiative resume under German or Portuguese leadership? What is your take on this?
Well, I guess Angela Merkel wants it under her own presidency. Germany takes over on the 1st of July for the second part, and she's very ambitious in order to get this going. It means a lot to German investment. Germany is the largest European investor in China, so she has a major stake in it. Yeah, I mean, again, if China doesn't move, then substance goes before speed, and then it ends up in the next year, and someone else has to sort of try to convince China. But let me also say that actually the investment agreement is a free trade agreement light, small in magnitude, much smaller than a free trade agreement. So when Cecilia Malmström became trade commissioner, she took over a couple of negotiations and concluded with Korea, with Singapore, with Vietnam, Mercosur, Canada, and so forth. And of course, the big one was Japan. And it shows that Europe can actually get things done. They can compromise, and it has a huge benefit for European business. So it's really puzzling why China doesn't compromise, why it doesn't move forward. It's a much smaller deal. And they always say, oh, China, Europe is so difficult, we can't compromise. Hey, I mean, 6, 7 free trade agreements of this magnitude shows pretty much that Europe's DNA is compromised. So in a way, it's a bit disappointing. It just shows that either they don't have the political clout to open here, or seriously not the interest that we hoped for.
The next question comes from former Swiss Ambassador Joerg WUTTKE about decoupling of production in China. He's asking, is there a trend towards for China in China, but less production in China for third countries?
I think when you look into our survey, it has always been China, in China for China. The car industry, definitely the largest car market in the world, 25 million cars. I mean, everyone builds cars in China for China. There's very little spillover into other markets. Chemicals, we pretty much produce everything for China, but then of course it ends up with customers that export out of China. You know, it goes into shoes and electronics and textile and so forth. But primarily we're here for China, for the Chinese market. And hence, that's why lobbying is so important, because we really have a major stake to lose if we don't step up and ask for our rights. Again, 30% of global growth over the next 10 years is in China only. Hence, that means we have to fight even harder in order to get a say, because frankly, our market share in many areas, be it insurance, be it banking, be it others, is eroding fast. Not only because we don't have market access, of course, but also because our Chinese competitors get better by the day.
Next question comes from Tony, our chairman. He's asking about the Chinese reaction to Trump's proposal of the G11.
That's a Tony question. You know, China's reaction, of course, is they have different quarters here. There is the polite quarter that sort of is symbolized by Ambassador Cui, a very skillful, capable, very nice man who is, this poor man is based in DC and has to deal with all of this. And then, of course, you have the wolf warriors that are bitching and biting and barking and everything that comes out of Washington. So in between, I mean, everything that Trump does now, of course, doesn't go down well here. The problem is he starts the campaign. I would call it the silly season. And from here until November, definitely it's going to go downhill. So fasten your seatbelt.
I have a couple of questions about Hong Kong for obvious reasons. So I'll take them together. I try to take them together into one question. Obviously, Hong Kong has long served as a very important bridge between mainland China and the rest of the world. Now, the new security law, does this mark the beginning of the end of one country, two systems? And what does it mean for foreign companies in Hong Kong?
Yeah, I mean, Hong Kong is really Asia's world city. It's a pearl. It's a unique city. It has attracted all the professionals. It has a wonderful judiciary system, freedom of speech, freedom of movement, freedom of transaction, and all of the above. So two systems, one country is vital in order to maintain this. Hong Kong cannot be replaced by Shanghai. The Chamber has done a study on this one and cannot be replaced by Shenzhen. But unfortunately, Hong Kong can be eroded. And that's what is happening right now. This uncertainty of intervention from the state in the Hong Kong decision process is very concerning. We have voiced this many times. So it's something where we rather would like to see the local government, Carrie Lam, reaching out to the demonstrators, looking into the inequality that hurts the city, looking into why the oligarchs have mismanaged the city. And, you know, she's the CEO, she's there, the CEO title says it all. It's about profit maximization, but Hong Kong needs a mayor. Hong Kong really needs someone who reaches out. So in a way, it's very sad. And then the US action, of course, is not going to be helpful at all. But I would caution on this one. I think it's overrated. Actually, it's in a funny twist. Hong Kong only exports its own products in the magnitude of $4 billion to the US. The US exports to China, to Hong Kong, $36 billion in 2019. So, I mean, you have this, the only region in the whole of Asia, I think, that has a trade imbalance in favor of America. So they have to really look into this. I think the kind of real damage that sort of Trump is projecting actually is overrated. The US doesn't have that kind of leverage on the economic side. Of course, they can hurt travelers, they can do to Hong Kong Chinese what they've done to Russians. And so, but I guess, again, it's a very sad story. It's a sad side to look at.
Our next question comes from Belarus, from STARS alumnus Yauheni Pryorman. He is the director of the Minsk Dialogue Council on International Relations. He's asking about the implications that the current situation might have for the BRI, for the Belt and Road Initiative.
Yeah. Well, I can only recommend that you go on the website of the European Chamber, on the category publications. Everything that I mentioned, all the surveys, all the papers, is free of charge. You don't have to be a member. And in January, we launched the Belt and Road Initiative paper. We ask our members in Germany, as well as in Europe, as well as in China, so what do you get out of this? And the results were so shocking because virtually our members get very little out of it as additional business. Of course, if you get a stadium, if you get a subway and so forth, built by the Chinese in the customary excellent manner as they can do it, airports, you know, that hurts to say that as a German, but definitely they build airports faster and better. But at the same time, if you look into the data set, you can see that actually there is very little for the local economy behind it. So China in average takes 90% of added value for a project, whereas in World Bank and other projects, it's about 40% or 30%. Local economy normally gets 40%. In the Belt and Road Initiative across the board, 6 to 7%, and foreign companies like our members, 3 to 4. So in a way, it is a closed shop that comes your way. And now the respective countries are paying for it with the taxpayer over the next years to come back. Now, are these countries that are on Belt and Road richer than 2019 or are going to be poorer? Obviously, they're going to take an economic hit. So the willingness and the ability of actually engaging with Belt and Road infrastructure will be diminished. Does China have a problem at the domestic economy? Big time. Do they rather want to spend money on Guizhou than say Venezuela? Of course. So in a way, I guess that the Belt and Road Initiative will still there. It's a political gesture, less of a business proposition actually. But I think in its significance will be diminished on the receiving side as well as on the providing side.
The next question comes from Mark Dickley, who you know very well. Mark Dickley is the editor-in-chief of The Market and the moderator at our symposia. He's writing, last week, it looked like there could be a worrying escalation after Secretary of State Pompeo said Hong Kong was not considered autonomous anymore, which was 1 week after publicly congratulating Tsai Ing-wen as well. What further steps do you expect and what worries you? And how is the crackdown of protests in the US seen in China?
Well, again, I think the kind of assumption that with the US doing what they do to Hong Kong, the damage will be severe, I think is overrated. The economic impact of the US on Hong Kong is not as big as you think. I don't believe the PEC is going to get attacked. I believe the impact will be on education. If they now basically withdraw from Hong Kong and have less independent researchers, professors, and so forth, I think Beijing is very happy about this, that the US withdraws. Hong Kong needs these spirits in order to have the freedom of speech. So in a way, it's sad to see that there is more show-making campaign style going on than real damage. But I guess that what worries me the most, Mark, is the fact that we have this kind of small actions one by one, and people get used to it. You know, we have Hong Kong being hammered from the US, and we have the US congratulating beautiful Chinese by my friend Matt Pottinger, the President Tsai for her election. We have things that were unthinkable in the past, and we get used to it. And all of a sudden, we might find ourselves in a place where we can't retract. We have all of a sudden realized how far we have gone and crossed red line after red line after red line, and then what? So in a way, I really caution about these baby steps they might disguise the fact that actually we take a big leap forward in order to get really confrontational.
The next question comes from another STARS alumnus based in Singapore, Stephen Du, who is the MD of SGS. He is asking about M&A in the EU. Do you expect Chinese companies' M&A in the EU will be subject to more rigid scrutiny in the future?
Certainly, that's the answer. First and foremost, there will be more scrutiny because there has been none so far. Germany and others had virtually no foreign investment law. Unlike here, we don't have a negative list. All of the kind of toolbox that China has in order to make our life difficult here doesn't exist in Europe. So this toolbox is very, very targeted for small actors, state-owned enterprises in security-related branches. And so when you just look over the last 1 or 2 years after this investment screening was put into place, thousands of transactions were gone through without any scrutiny. A couple, I think 200, 300 were actually screened, and I think 4 or 5 were actually rejected. So you have to keep a perspective there that Europe is not coming up with China negative style of investment lists. Of course, it will get bigger because China has great appetite, particularly among SOEs, in order to look at high-profile targets, and there will be more jittery nervousness. At the same time, of course, we want Chinese investment, the more the merry, but we don't want the kind of made in China 2025 investment scheme. We want Chile Volvo. We want this kind of sunny and Putzmeister deals, private, entrepreneurial driven, and it just shows how wonderful they work out. I mean, just look at Volvo, what a success story that became over the last years, courtesy to Chile.
The next question comes from Yves Raymond, who is the head of the economic section at the Swiss Embassy in Beijing. Here's his question. To limit negative effects of decoupling, should European countries focus on engaging China on standards? If yes, how exactly?
Well, we do engage. The European delegation is a couple of 100 meters away from the Swiss embassy, and they have a dedicated staff on this one. We have a working group in the European Chamber that only focus on standards. As a matter of fact, in our position paper, this 400-page beast, you can download it segment by segment. We have more than 30. One is on standards, I think it's 30 pages, very technical. Yes, I mean, we should engage by all means. We should engage not only in order to talk to China to see reason in the fact that they should join international standards and not sort of come up with their own ones that makes life difficult, more complex and costly afterwards. So no, I guess that the more engagement and the more information exchange, the better for all of us.
We have to come to a close, but I'll take 2 more questions. The first one comes from Uli Sick, who is the former Swiss ambassador to China. He's writing that the US may rather target the financial center in Hong Kong. Even the currency peg may get an issue. So what weight does Hong Kong still have as financial center for China?
Well, that's an honor to have Uli among the visitors of this STARS program. I mean, he's an icon for all of us here. I guess that the leverage actually is not that much. You know, is the US going to punish Hong Kong-based banks? They had this discussion with Russia, and not really. Small banks were targeted, small banks that dealt with Russia, breaking sanctions and so forth. I guess that Hong Kong has this unique cluster of professionals, has the depth of the financial markets that is very hard to match anywhere else in Asia. So let me remain optimistic on the financial engineering side of things. China will be more dominant, of course, for 2 reasons. They might not be in a position to place bonds and everything elsewhere in the world. And secondly, I mean, again, 30% of global growth is going to be mainland China. Across the border of Hong Kong, there's a city called Shenzhen that has the GDP of South Africa. So in a way, yes, I think let's be optimistic for once that Hong Kong remains a financial engineering center of Asia.
Great. Following your optimistic spirit, I would also like to end on a positive note, if possible. From the perspective of the EU and European business in particular, do you see any silver lining in US-China decoupling?
No, absolutely not. It is, I mean, Mona laid it out perfectly. I'm sorry, David, you put yourself in that position right now. Mona made it very clear, and I can only sort of second her. We have a terrible year ahead of us. Now, if Biden wins, then maybe we have a different style, but essence is the same. It's driven, the whole trade war is maybe coming out of the White House, but the tech war and the increasing kind of finance war that you see is masterminded by the Congress. It's bipartisan. As you rightfully started this session, the mood, the soft power of China is eroding in the US. Likewise here, I don't know. It is, sorry to end on that one, but nah, it's depressing.
Not very upbeat, but I think in these times a very fitting closing statement. Thank you very much, Joerg, for your time and for sharing your unique perspective with us. We really look forward to continue the discussion, hopefully, at the Star Switzerland Symposium in September. Thank you, Joerg.
Thank you. Thank you, David.
I would also like to thank all our alumni who participated in this webinar. Over the course of the last 30 minutes, around 80 participants tuned in from across many time zones. In the next STARS webinar on the 11th of June, exactly in a week from now, we will talk with STARS alumna Astri Vayuni. She's the Vice President of Public Policy and Government Relations at e-commerce giant Tokopedia. The topic will be Promise and Reality of Indonesia's Tech Innovation Ecosystem. I hope to see you there. In the meantime, take care and stay healthy. Thank you and goodbye.